Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Gatewood, the Communications and Marketing Director at CFRE International, and we are very thrilled to have you with us today for our first U.S. panel webinar in a very, very long time. Today, we're going to look at how the CFRE can accelerate your fundraising career. We have a fabulous moderator and 4 stellar panelists who are going to be sharing their wisdom with you. Before we hear from them, we're going to do some quick housekeeping, and then I'm going to do a couple of slides of background information about the CFRE credential. First thing is we are recording today's presentation. You will be emailed a link to the presentation along with a link to the slide deck in 24 hours to the email address you used when you registered. Be on the lookout for that tomorrow. We also are just going to talk really briefly about the CFRE application cost. The CFRE process includes an application and an exam, and you pay one fee for submitting your application, and that also includes all of your testing fees. So that's just the one fee that you would pay when you submit your application. If you are a member of a participating organization, the cost is $700 US. That includes AFP, AHP, charitable gift planners, NACDO, NATO. The full list of 30 is on our website, and I'll send a link through in a few minutes where you can view all of them. If you are not a current member with one of our participating organizations, the cost is $875 US. We also have a question pane today. Feel free to type your questions in there. I will be on the back end answering them, and we will bubble some of those up when we have Q&A time towards the end of the hour. And I'm just going to start with why are credentials in demand? Because I hear this when I exhibit on behalf of CFRE at conferences where people say, I am hitting my targets, I'm not looking to change jobs. Why would I want to consider a professional credential like the CFRE? And one of the main reasons is because it demonstrates your knowledge. Any of us can walk into a job interview or can walk into a new department and say, I'm great, check me out, I know so much. But when you have a credential, that is the proof in the pudding that you can walk the talk. It means that a third party has validated your knowledge and they are saying, yes, this person knows what they say they know. Certificate programs, academic degrees, they are very beneficial. They're incredibly useful in our lifelong learning, but they become outdated very quickly, right? If anybody here has a bachelor's or master's more than 10 years old, you know exactly what I mean, right? They are a representation of a snapshot in time of learning that you do. The CFRE credential requires recertifying every 3 years, and that's why it's so popular with employers, because your knowledge is always current. All right, why are credentials in demand? Part 2. All right, you will be sought after. If employers have the option to choose between someone who has a credential and someone who doesn't, it's oftentimes a safer feeling and a more reassuring feeling to go with a person who has an industry credential. It shows their commitment to ongoing education and that their practice is in fact up to date. We started in 1981, which we'll talk about on this slide real quick, and we have 2 CFREs in 2023 who are still CFREs and earned their CFRE designation in 1981. If they never had to recertify, if they never did another minute of professional development, we would all be pretty terrified, right? But because they have recertified every 3 years, we know that they have been in the game a very long time, but that their knowledge remains current. We are the only globally recognized and accredited credential for fundraising professionals. So no matter where your donors are, your corporate sponsors are, your stakeholders are in the world, your CFRE means the exact same thing as it does in the US and abroad. Everything about the CFRE is grounded in ethical best practice fundraising. All of us want to think nobody in a nonprofit ever steps out of line. Nobody in a nonprofit is ever unethical, but we know that's not true. The CFRE process is designed to help you fortify your knowledge of ethical best practice fundraising. As the CFRE told me earlier this year, you may be doing something unethical unintentionally. And the CFRE process will help you identify and remedy that, because you do not want to pass down bad behaviors, right? If you're doing something that you think is ethical but actually isn't, you don't want to train your staff incorrectly, right? Because then that becomes an even bigger issue. So the CFRE helps ensure that as you go forward in your fundraising, you can be confident that you are aware of globally accepted ethical best practices. Also, we talked about the application cost, and people say, Ashley, you know, that's $700 and I have a family and I have a car payment. But I want to provide this statistic that AFP released just a month or two ago in their 2023 compensation and benefits report. So this is current, and this is not our data. This is AFP's third-party data. It found that CFREs in the US earn 5 to 16% more than their colleagues without the credential. This has held steady from last year's findings as well, which is great. Think of the CFRE as an investment in yourself that will pay dividends over the longevity of your development career. All right, so with that, I am going to turn it over to our moderator today, Heather Hill. Heather has been a CFRE since 2009. She is a past board chair of CFRE International, as well as a past chair of our Committee on Directorship. She is currently the head of international philanthropy at Chapel in York. So I will now turn it over to Heather. So Heather, if you're there, feel free to turn your camera on and mic, and we will let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Ashley, and thank you to all of you who've registered for this webinar, and thank you for your interest in the CFRE. I can't say enough good things about it, and it's truly just an honor for me to be here moderating this webinar today. Even more of an honor is being able to moderate with such wonderful panelists, and I'm happy to introduce them to you as we get started. With us today, we have Josué Hernández. He's been a CFRE since 2021, and currently he's the Assistant Director of Donor Engagement at Memorial Medical Center Foundation in Long Beach, California. We also have Andrew Polter, who's been a CFRE since 2019, and is currently the Senior Director of Development for the College of Medicine at the University of Cincinnati Foundation in Cincinnati, Ohio. With us also is Nicole Robinson-Gauthier, CFRE since 2010. She is the Executive Director at Lone Star College Foundation in Houston, Texas. And also we have Tycely Williams, who is a CFRE since 2009 and holds the position of Chief Development Officer at the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington, D.C. So all amazing panelists, all CFREs, all outstanding fundraisers, each of whom has their own interesting story and pathway into the CFRE. So with that, I want to jump into our conversation today. And this question is for all of the panelists. So why did you want to become a CFRE? And where were you in your career when you first began the process? So Tycely, let's start with you.
Absolutely. So Heather, I want to thank you for moderating. I'm also really excited about the inspiration that awaits. But when I think back to 2008, when I started contemplating steps I would need to take to actually sit for the exam, I am reminded of the number of executives in the fundraising field that I admired. I was entering my career probably mid-level. I had a few years of experience under my belt, and I aspired to one day be a chief development officer. And many of the individuals who I met and came in contact with through the Association of Fundraising Professionals here in Washington, D.C., they held a credential. And so it was peer pressure, or I would say peer wisdom, that actually led me to the CFRE.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Tycely. And Nicole, what about you?
So I had a little bit of peer pressure in a different way. My boss at the time was looking at the CFRE, and so we decided to go down the path together. But at the time, the way the qualifications were, I qualified to take it because I had been an active fundraiser for a decade, and she did not. I will also add that I knew nothing about the CFRE. She brought it to my attention. Where I was previously, it wasn't common, and I didn't know a ton about it. And then all of a sudden, my eyes were open to this whole new world of certification. And so I went down the path, probably 10 years in as an active fundraiser, and like I said, didn't know anything about it, and applied at the time because my boss could not. And that was kind of what a great motivation that I was the only one eligible on the team. And so I went for it.
Yes, as you said, it's a very different kind of peer pressure when it comes from your boss, but what an interesting catalyst to set you off on your journey. Josué, what about you?
Well, I would like to say that philanthropy saved my life. 15 years ago, I received a medical diagnosis that changed my life, and it was thanks to a nonprofit organization that provided me with the resources that I needed to navigate my new diagnosis. That experience inspired me to use my skills to be part of the healing in my community. And so as part of my commitment to philanthropy and the professionalization of my fundraising career, I decided to pursue my CFRE the day I started my first fundraising job. So I submitted my application to sit for the CFRE as soon as I met the 3-year minimum experience. I had already worked on and completed the rest of the 2 other areas of education and hours, learning hours. And I'm excited because currently I'm in the process of recertifying for the first time my CFRE.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And Andrew, what about you? How did you start the process? What made you want to become a CFRE, and where were you in your career?
Sure. Thanks for your question, Heather, and thanks to all of the fellow panelists up here. Already inspired, and I'm already writing down some quotes. So like some others have shared, there is a sense of peer pressure, and it's a positive sense of peer pressure. But I would go to AFP events and I would see this, somebody's name, first name, last name, comma, CFRE. And just being a curious individual, I'd say, well, what's that about? And, oh, it's this credential that means you're somewhat of an expert. You've passed an exam. You have a commitment to the field. And right away, I said, well, I want to get that. And so I had that in mind even early on in my career as a target. And in higher education, where I've worked primarily for the past 9 years now, everyone that I meet with, whether it's my dean, my academic partners, everybody has some kind of credential behind their name. So perhaps they're an MD, a JD, a PhD. And I wanted to be at that table and also say, well, for my field, I have the credential as well that certifies that I'm an expert in my chosen profession.
That's fantastic. And it's interesting hearing the stories, because I think the common thread that comes through all of this is that somewhere someone crossed your path that inspired you who had a CFRE, whether that was a boss, someone at a conference, a colleague, someone who was involved in the philanthropic world that changed your life. So I think it's really great, as far as speaking for the credential, that other CFREs kind of helped spark that interest, in addition to other things, but that's a fun common thread to see. So Tycely and Nicole, this next question is for you. As both of you are CFREs who've held the credential for more than 13 years, what's the biggest misconception that you hear where you'd like to set the record straight? And Tycely, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. So, because we're all relationship builders, I spend quite a bit of time speaking with aspiring individuals who are probably in the same set of circumstances as many of our attendees. And I think the myth that I hope to bust during this conversation is you can actually have a self-directed and self-guided take when it comes to preparation. I've met so many people over the years who've said, you know, there's a local study group and they get together at times of day that aren't convenient for me as a parent, or there are not study groups available in my region, in my city. I am not going to be prepared. And what's great, Heather, is that CFRE has worked really, really hard to identify the appropriate resources so that you can read, you can even practice your knowledge base by taking sample tests and questions. And so I just want to encourage people, as you're thinking through the pathway of completion and implementing, it is really, really easy peasy. Now, you've got to put in the work, you've got to put in the time, but it can be flexible and it can also be accommodating to your existing commitments. So, Heather, I just think it's really, really important for people to know that they can chart their own path as far as preparation is concerned.
That's a really important truth to bring out and myth to bust. You don't have to have a huge community or study groups around you. You can do it on your own. You can set your own pace, and there are resources out there to help you, whether you're doing it on your own or whether you're doing it with colleagues or peers or friends. And Nicole, what about you? What myth would you like to bust about CFRE?
I think it's the why do I need it? I'm already successful. I'm doing this work. I was doing the work successfully for 10 years, but all of a sudden I looked up and there was something else that could give me that checkbox, right? That said, she knows what she's talking about. She's done this and we've tested her, right? I mean, it's a certification. And so I think, and I even get that question now because I'm not a major gift officer. I'm the executive director of the foundation. But I still have a portfolio. I still, just like any good nonprofit, you know, everybody does a little of everything. And so I still am an active fundraiser and I still have a portfolio. And so it was important for me to keep that, even in this role that I'm in now. And so I think at all the stages, it's helpful. And we said it at the beginning, the most important part of this certification is the 3-year recertification, proving that we're up to date on the work that we do and staying up with industry standards and ethics and all of the above. So I think that's it for me, is that it's good at any level, at any time, right? Once you meet the minimum qualifications, I think it's helpful.
That's such a great point to raise. And I remember having actually the opposite experience when I was looking at CFRE, is that I hadn't seen many young CFREs at the time. I thought, oh gosh, that's something I can't do until I'm much later in my career. Then when I started doing a bit of investigation, at that time it was a 5-year requirement. I was like, oh, I have that. I can do this. Yeah, it's at any stage in your career, it's right, you know, it can be right for you. It's not, you're never too far in or too early for it. As long as you meet that minimum requirement, you know, it's a credential for you. All right, and Josué and Andrew, this next one is for both of you. So you're more recent CFREs, but I'd be curious to hear in which ways you've seen the CFRE credential grant you greater recognition as a professional. Like, how has it elevated your profile? Josué, we'll start with you.
Great. Yes. So it has elevated my profile, my credibility, and my marketability to a whole other level. So my profile has been elevated at events, conferences, networking events, I think Andrew mentioned, having the CFRE letters after my name on a badge is always a topic of conversation. CFREs seek other CFREs, which is also great. It's just a great big network of CFREs whenever I go to a conference. I'm the only one in my office who currently has an active CFRE, and I work with experienced fundraisers who are also older and have are seasoned professionals, and I believe that the CFRE has allowed me to express my opinions and suggestions, and they are received and they are encouraged and celebrated. Also, my CFRE has allowed me to increase my marketability, so recruiters seek me out regularly, and I have been able to command a salary that meets my expectations during job interviews.
That's fantastic. And Andrew, same question for you. How's the credential provided greater recognition for you?
Yes, I agree with everything that's been said, word for word. You can copy and paste that anywhere. So true, from recruiters reaching out consistently saying, would you consider this executive position? That is a commonplace thing, I think, after receiving the CFRE, is you are now in this kind of club of those folks who have made it, who have expressed that they are committed to this field and that they are truly experts. I would also say, like has been said before, the CFRE has allowed me to have a voice. It has magnified my voice. And at conferences, I have opportunities to speak now where perhaps I would just be just in the audience before. So as recent as last year, spoke at AFP Icon as one of the presenters. I've given countless educational sessions just like this on the CFRE. I have spoken numerous times. I've become now a published writer. So all of these things, I believe, have been a result of earning the CFRE.
Wonderful. That's so great to hear. So Tycely and Nicole, another one for the two of you. How have you found holding the CFRE credential to be useful when you're job seeking? So as you're looking for a new position, what has CFRE meant for that process? And Tycely, why don't we start with you?
Absolutely. So Heather, I'm going to introduce some factual information. So according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, there will actually be more than 9,000 fundraising openings this year. So you kind of do the math and you're like, wow, there's a lot of competition and a lot of qualified, experienced execs likely vying for the same opportunity, especially if it's a culture where the fundraiser is appreciated and affirmed, and it's a healthy culture, right? We're all shaking our heads saying, yes, 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 count me in. We want to be in a best place to work. Well, best places to work and high-performing teams are often needing to differentiate from the pile of applicants that come in. So Heather, I will say my own experience as a hiring manager, when I'm giving thought to who do we take the time to get to know, who do we possibly advance to the next round, that it is a very different set of circumstances if someone says that they are a lifelong learner. It's very different when someone can showcase that they're a lifelong learner. So having the CFRE is actually a proof point. It signals that someone can follow up, follow through. It not only references the skill sets that they have that Andrew, Nicole, and Josué have done an excellent job speaking to, but they have the type of mindset that we're looking for. They have a growth mindset. And so I think it is so critically important when you look at those 4 credentials to see them as a way for you to differentiate yourself from the pack. I also think that as you're thinking through the value add, that you want to be mindful that when your resume is available online. So Andrew, you talk about the individuals that are proactively reaching out for thought leadership. They have the ability to substantiate a little bit about who you are and what you're likely to bring to the table. And so once you've earned your CFRE, not only is it a great place to have on your resume, but it's just wonderful to increase your personal brand and your individual social capital.
Thank you, Tycely. You've raised some very excellent points on that. And I think mindset is key in what you said. The CFRE is a practice-based credential, meaning you have to be a practicing fundraiser and continue to practice and continue to pursue professional development and education in order to maintain the credential. And that really is a differentiator from someone who doesn't have that, or maybe just has a degree, which they earned at the time, but doesn't say anything about what they've done since as far as continuing to pursue knowledge and what's happening in the sector and being current on fundraising. So I'm so glad that you raised that. And Nicole, what about you? How have you found holding the credential to be useful when job seeking?
I found it very useful, especially in the job that I'm in. And everything that Tycely just said, I'm going to illustrate in this story, because when often you don't get feedback from your interviews, right? But I did when I interviewed for this position, and I was moved to the next round as a finalist. And I was told one of the reasons was my CFRE. And that is a true story. It is not a setup for this webinar. One of the board members pulled me aside and said, and so this is one thing I did wrong in my interview. And she told me right away, she said, you undersold your credential. And I said, what are you talking about? And she proceeded to tell me that the candidate right before me had submitted and hadn't submitted the application, was prepping her application and was getting it ready and hadn't submitted yet, and talked about what a big deal it was. And she was working on this major credential and going to schedule the test, but hadn't yet because she was working on her timeline to study. Well, she didn't know that she had just set it up for me to knock it out of the park, because I walked into the interview, talked about the credential, and I had just certified for the second time, like 60 days before the interview. And so I just kind of blew through it as something I had, something I did. It was just kind of what people like me did, and I moved on. And so at the end of the interview, they told, after I got the job and further down the road, she said that that was really a tipping point for me in the interview, because our skills were similar, right? Our skills and our experience, our age, all of these things, and they were looking at the profile. But my CFRE was like, check, done, move on. And so I think it was the tipping point for me to get the job that I'm in right now.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great illustration of what Tycely has shared. So that worked out well.
Yes, it did.
Proof of concept. So the next question I have is, so did you speak to your boss about supporting you in the CFRE process, and what was the outcome of those conversations? And Nicole, I'd like to ask that of you first.
Yes, since I started the process with my boss and then ended up being the only one going through it. Yes, we talked about it. She fully supported me going through it. You know, she was let me go through study sessions. I mean, some of that was even during work time. And then when it came to the point of, I took the day off for the exam, and then I can't remember, it's been a minute now, but I can't remember if the organization paid for my CFRE in full or if they split it with me, but I definitely had support in the form of having time to do those things and make sure that I was prepared, because it was a priority for the organization, because at the time it didn't have any CFREs. So having their first was important.
That's great. Well, Andrew, same question for you. Did you speak to your boss about supporting you in the process, and how did that go?
Yes, I did. So I devised a plan that if I pass this exam, they would pay for it. And if I failed the exam, I would pay for it myself. So it was really no risk to the organization. That for myself, that was a motivating factor to pass the first time. But that was our plan. It was this fiscal year, I'm going to take my professional development allotment, which is typically applied towards a conference, a webinar, something like that. And I said, I'm not going to do that this year. I'm going to focus solely on the CFRE, pass the first time, and have moved forward ever since. I think what they saw in me was an investment in my career, but also an investment in the organization. The more folks that have best practice, certification, ethical practices, all those, what you are truly looking for in a fundraising professional, if we can have that on the team, the opportunities are endless for us to raise funds the right way. So I tried to position it where it was for myself, but also for the team and the organization.
Yeah, that's a great story, really emphasizing the value adds to the organization by having a CFRE in the team. Similar to what we heard from Nicole as well, about being the first in the organization. It makes a huge difference. So Andrew and Josué, I wanted to ask you both as well, since you've done this semi-recently, but how did you go about preparing for the CFRE exam? And what study advice would you have? I'm sure a lot of people on the webinar today would love to hear this because I think it's one of the most commonly asked questions. Andrew, let's start with you.
Sure. I remember when I started preparing for the CFRE, I would go through just practice questions I could find online, or maybe one came up at an AFP session. There's a 411 on the CFRE and some other programs, and I would get the answers wrong consistently. And I was like, this does not align with my experience. Why am I getting these wrong? Until I turned off my experience and I said, this is a standardized test, just like a GMAT. And I need to understand the perspective of the exam and where it is coming from. Once I changed my perspective and realized that there are rules and there's a viewpoint and there's all these mechanisms that go into the CFRE exam, once I get that wrapped around in my head, then I can be successful. So what helped me get to that point was getting the study guide. I think that is critical to anyone taking this exam. And also preparing how it works best for yourself.
Yeah.
I started with a study group and everybody was at different stages in their careers, their point in which they were going to take the exam. Some ended up not taking it. That wasn't really helpful for me because I have historically liked to study on my own. I can really focus and hone in and go back on questions and do all of that on my own. And so that worked for me. Once I found the right technique, the right strategy, and I had the right material, then I was able to be successful.
Great. And Josué, what about you?
Well, I prepared for the exam 6 months prior to sitting for the exam. So I make sure I dedicated the 6 months building up to that date. But as soon as I started my first job, I created the CFRE account to track my progress. I read Preparing for the CFRE exam, which is on the CFRE.org website. I reviewed the study aid section. I printed out the test content outline. I signed up for the practice exam. I read cover to cover Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, which is one of the suggested readings for preparation for the CFRE. Flashcards were a lifesaver, so I created flashcards, including glossary terms that are also on the CFRE.org website. I reviewed the candidate handbook to find out what to expect about taking the exam. I stayed in touch with others who were preparing for the exam. I just found self-study to be allowed me to stay focused and just be able to absorb as much information and stay focused. During the 6 months, I would study for 2 hours, Monday through Thursday. One day I would focus on flashcards. another day on reading, and then another day on practice exam. And closer to the date, I focused just on my flashcards. I would specifically spend time on concepts that I had the hardest time learning and any practice exams that I found the most challenging.
That's great. And what I'm hearing from both of you is really just finding the system that works best for you and consistently working through it. So plan to work and work the plan, essentially, and leading up to taking the exam. And Josué, I liked what you said as well about looking at the candidate handbook to get an idea of what to expect. So whether I think you're doing that through the handbook or asking someone who's been through the experience, I think knowing what to expect when you actually sit down and take the exam is an important part of prep that you might not think about, but can alleviate a lot of anxiety, so you're not walking into kind of an unknown situation. So Tycely and Josué, this question is for you. Do you feel that being a CFRE has helped your organization have better fundraising success and or improved your ability to manage your team and orient new fundraisers on your team to the profession? So has it helped your organization succeed in its fundraising, or has it helped you build and manage your team as they grow in their fundraising, or maybe both? But Tycely, we'll start with you.
Heather, I'm going to go with survey says both. I think they are one and the same. So like Nicole, I sat for the exam many, many moons ago, and a lot has changed about ethical, effective, and efficient fundraising since 2009. So it has been wonderful for me as the leader of the team and the head strategist to have a better understanding on the tactical side, how things are evolving, and to really force myself not to just say I'm a lifelong learner, but to actually step forward and attend conferences, present at conferences, write. It's really, really important to stay up to date as it pertains to not only the emerging trends of others, but to really innovate and invent within your individual teams. We are all seeking to advance meaningful missions. And in many ways, we are solving problems. And we have to make sure that we're not just focusing on the tactical elements. We've also got to be strategic, and we've got to be creative. We've got to be resourceful. And so the CFRE has really helped me to gain insight on starting points. And a lot of that is tied to the renewal process, which Heather, you've spoken to, Nicole's spoken to. Anybody who continues to be a CFRE has or will at some point need to recertify. And I would say that the vast majority of my team, many of whom are starting their careers, they too have really enjoyed learning about the CFRE, what's involved. And I think they've been excited about the opportunity to not only learn from someone who values the credential, but to the point we've all made, through my connections to other CFREs, they've been able to benefit from other creative thinking, from additional ingenuity. And so I think on so many levels, it has been a win-win. And because we're all relational and because problem solving demands that we have connections to others, I also think that the community of CFREs is one that is invaluable and often overlooked.
Yes, absolutely. I like the both answer and wholeheartedly agree with that. Josué, what would you say for this question?
Being a CFRE has helped me help my organization. Learning the fundamentals about fundraising has allowed me to grow professionally remain flexible, and take on new responsibilities from program development, volunteer management, annual giving, major gifts, and these are all focus areas you prepare for and are tested on during the CFRE exam.
That's a great point. And I've mentioned this myself in conversations with people considering the CFRE. One of the huge benefits, not just for you as an individual, but as you're working in an organization, as you come to a point where you're managing teams, preparing for the exam, kind of, if you haven't already, it forces you into learning about all those bits of fundraising that maybe you haven't had direct involvement in. Plan giving tends to be a rather niche part of fundraising, but it's something that you need to be familiar with and have a working knowledge of for the exam. So it's good to be able to broaden your depth of knowledge just through the exam prep. And Josué, as you just said, it has so many ripple effects in the work and in the organization later on. As we're wrapping up, I have one last question for each of you. For anyone who's listening to this webinar, whether they're here right now, whether they're watching the recording, if they're on the fence about earning their CFRE credential, what is your advice to them? And Tycely, we'll start with you.
All righty. Well, I think that we have created a lot of excitement. And Heather, my bit of advice is set the intentionality, activate the courage, and just do it. I think oftentimes as problem solvers and relationship builders, we are always putting the needs of others first. And it is time for us to be selfish. It is time for us to find a way to manage all of the competing demands, but to also prioritize that which we know is important. And Ashley's earlier point, that which will enable us to increase our earning potential. I mean, we are all do-gooders and we love saving the world and we love making sure that things are bright and better. And we need to recognize that our careers are also pathways to support ourselves, support our families, and to continue making financial investments in those causes and charities that we care about.
Absolutely. Nicole, what's your advice to anyone who's still deciding?
So I think I agree with that. It's about making that timeline, really. It's what's the timeline? You heard Josué say 6 months, and he made a schedule and he knew what the plan was. So what's your timeline? What's your plan? And I find that when I talk to folks about the process, the exam is what scares them the most. The exam is what we tend to talk about the most. And so I always talk people through the domains and say, look at what the test is on and brush up on all the things you know, but dive in a little deeper to the, like you said, Heather, with plan giving. That's, you know, an area that a lot of people aren't comfortable with, and you have to have a level of knowledge, right? Not always a depth of knowledge, but a level of knowledge. And so focusing on the timeline and working in there the items that you feel the weakest at, where you feel like you need to build your knowledge and your confidence, and that'll put you into the exam in a good place.
Great advice. Josué, what about you?
I echo Tycely and Nicole. Do it. Do it for yourself. Do it to advance in your career. Do it to get that promotion. Do it for the fun of learning. We are very fortunate to work in a field where we are not required to first have a credential before starting our careers. Let's think about, doctors, nurses, therapists, architects, lawyers, and the list goes on. So in many ways, it's not expected from us as fundraisers to continue our education. However, earning your CFRE shows your commitment to the field. That is why it's so fulfilling to obtain your CFRE. If you decide to pursue your CFRE, your employer will most likely find a way of supporting you one way or the other. It shows initiative from your part. And in the worst case scenario, and very, very unlikely scenarios that you don't pass the first time, you can take it again. your job doesn't depend on it. So do it for yourself. There are all the resources there that you can prepare yourself and take your time.
Great. And Andrew, what's your advice?
Again, I agree with everything that has been said. Two things I want to add into the mix, though, are if you are interested about the exam or even what the CFRE is, connect with another CFRE. Pick their brain, ask them about their experience. Why did they pursue it? What benefits have they received? And then also, many of us on this call are CFRE ambassadors. And so connect with a CFRE ambassador. We are here for you. We want to see you succeed, and we will be your personal mentor and coach along the journey for you. I have mentored countless individuals who are just curious, and they're at all stages of the process. Some just need somebody to be on the phone with them when they're taking and pushing that submit button. Some people are just getting started. So we are here for you. We have raised our hands as professionals who want to give back to the community and to the field. So please connect with the resources that are out there. You do not have to do this alone.
Absolutely. And I think that common thread through all these answers is just commit to doing it, set a timeline for yourself, and tap into the resources around you, whether that's going through the practice exam or picking up a book or making flashcards, or if it's reaching out to other CFREs, if you're a member of one of our participating organizations like AFP or others, reach out to your local chapter, find a CFRE there, have an accountability buddy, somebody who's checking in with you and keeping you honest about that timetable that you set for yourself. Hey, how's the studying going? But really, I think more than anything, just make the commitment and do it. The application's not going to complete itself, and the prep's not going to do itself. And the longer you sit thinking about it, more time going by that you're not doing it. So to echo Tycely, Nicole, Josué, and Andrew, just do it.
Hey everyone, it's me, Ashley. I'm back again. Thank you, Heather, for an amazing job moderating this panel. We have our Q&A. I'm going to kick it off right now. We've had some amazing questions coming from people, and I know that we've got some awesome perspectives that we're going to get to folks. So I thought this one was super interesting. Someone said, I love that you all are part of orgs that value the credential, but I've been a CFRE almost 10 years and I haven't been able to sway my organization to appreciate the CFRE. Any advice on how to guide their perspective? So I was going to see if we could get Tycely and Josué to weigh in on how you sway your skeptical organization that your CFRE is worth it.
I love it. Well, I must say, as a chief development officer at a think tank, that proof points are really, really important. So I would start by revisiting, and actually, hopefully, we can share the link to AFP's most recent study. I think there are two proof points that I would center in helping your organization value the CFRE. One would be, I would just hone in on the number of individuals around the globe who have stepped forward to actually obtain the credential. And then I would showcase what Ashley alluded to earlier. Once you earn the CFRE, you are actually not only adding value for yourself, you're also adding value for your organization. And so I would, from a quantifiable perspective, hone in on the number of executives who see it as a value and say, I want to join. And actually, I don't know the newest number as far as the number of CFREs we have in the world, but I think you want to assert that I want to be in that number. I am in that number. As a result, I'm wise, I'm smart, I'm also committed not only to the profession, but I've been within this organization. And I think to Andrew's point about the qualitative, I would reach out to ambassadors or look for the testimonials that are on the CFRE website. And they don't have to hear it from you. They can trust Nicole's endorsement. Maybe they're more likely to trust Andrew's endorsement. And you can also attach the social proof as far as the organizations and the institutions where they work. And I think if you blend the quantifiable and the qualitative, you're able to paint a picture. Now, the unfortunate piece is everyone is not going to value the CFRE. However, you can ensure that you are making a strong case. I know every fundraiser is really, really good at making a compelling case. And I would just invite you to activate the same skills that you activate when inviting a donor to make a financial investment, when trying to re-engage with a lapsed donor who has no longer said they're willing to invest in your mission. Take the same type of approach, remain consistent and persistent, introduce the proof points, bring in the voices and insights from others to validate what you're saying. And then, my dear fundraising friend, once you've done your best, you walk away knowing that the CFRE has value, because after all, you're dealing with people's opinions and not necessarily statements of fact. So we'll respect the varying opinions. We will know the truth, and we will proudly stand behind the truth and assert the value of CFRE. But wish you the best with that. That's a hard predicament. Josué, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'd be curious to know more about that particular situation, and I'd be curious to know how would that look like for that this participant to know to feel that her supervisor values the CFRE. Does that mean a salary increase, a promotion, increased responsibility? With that in mind, I would always refer you back to the CFRE.org website. There's so many resources as to why the CFRE is so valuable, how challenging to in preparing and taking the CFRE exam is. There are many ways to show value for the CFRE, but it'd be interesting to know, well, how does that look like for the supervisor? What would make my supervisor think twice that, hey, maybe I should actually support my direct reports interest in pursuing the CFRE, because the CFREs are actually in hot demand, and so maybe I want to retain this talent. So yeah, I would refer you back to the CFRE website and check out the resources there.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Josué, because I think some supervisors are scared you're going to get your CFRE and then you're going to get poached, right? But the thing is, your organization, it is their duty to invest in you, to show you that you are worth it. Awesome. So we've got another great question here. It says, let's see. How long did it take to attain the CFRE? So from sort of start to finish, you begin your application to you sit for the exam. So we've got a couple questions, and I know we're short on time. So could we get a 1-minute answer from Andrew and a 1-minute answer from Nicole?
Yeah, Ashley, I will say this depends on the specific applicant. I had 2 stints. First, I had a stint where I was meeting with a study group, and that took a couple months. I left that employer, however, and so I had to kind of start over the process. Once I had restarted the process, I would say it took maybe 3 to 4 solid months of getting the study guide, going through the online questions, meeting with other CFREs, picking their brains, and having a program that worked for myself. It's up to you, your study style. Some can take a year, and that's okay. And some have winged it, and some have been successful, some have not. But I would encourage you at least 3 to 4 months of serious, consistent practice.
And how long did it take you to fill out your application from start to end?
Start to end, like others, I started it right away as soon as I knew I wanted to take the CFRE. So I logged my education hours right away, everything I had at that point, all the dollars, all of my professional practice. So if you have everything and if you're ready to go, you've got the dollars, the years of experience, and the education, you could do it in a day. But I did it over time. Every time I attended a session, I'd go back to the CFRE website, add that 1 hour, that 2 hours, whatever that was. It can be as short as a day or as long as, the duration that you need. It is open and you can go back to it anytime to update.
Yes, a great reminder. Yeah, once you start your app, you don't have to submit it or fill it out in one go. You can keep coming back to it and chipping away at it. And Nicole, your perspective on how long it took you start to end.
Well, I think that's a good tip for anyone when you recertify, because I have an application going now that tracks all my information right now, ready for the next one. But when I got started, because the application was easy for me because I had been in for so long, I qualified. I filled out the application. I'm like, oh, I qualify for the test immediately. And I was a little shocked. And I wish I could go back and track what I did, because I don't remember how long it took me, because I wasn't as intentional as we're telling you to be. I was kind of like, oh, I'm going to study here, I'm going to study there. I did a workshop, I did a study. I didn't do any study groups, but I did read Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, the book everyone talks about. That's the one thing that I recommend over and over, because I used the advice I gave today. Is I focused on the areas I felt like I was weak in. There were areas that I felt like I had enough experience and I could check those, and I focused in on where I thought I was weak. And so I was intentional with that, but I don't know that I had a schedule and a time frame. But I do think the 3 to 4 month prep time is a reasonable amount. I wouldn't go longer than 6 months, because this, make it happen.
Yep, very good. I've heard people studying for the CFRE in as short as 6 consecutive weekends and up to 11 months. So for the exam, there really is whatever works for you. Okay, somebody has asked about if today's session counts for a CFRE education point. It does. If you are on the webinar for the full 60 minutes, you will be able to put into your CFRE application the name of the webinar, the organizer is CFRE International, and the panelists, where it says speakers, you're just going to type various. You don't have to worry about typing all 5 people's names.
I like how that questioner thinks they're already on top of it.
And let me see if there's one other thing here. Okay, what is your advice for a young professional who's going on 3 years, who wants to get the CFRE, but the only CFREs at their organization are at the leadership level? So they're having a hard time getting people to see that at the beginning of their career, they should also pursue this. So let's ask, actually, I would love to ask this question to Heather, because you have also been a CFRE for a very long time. So what would be your advice to somebody who it's just leadership, or the ones that seem to be the CFREs?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So one would think that being in the leadership role, they know quite well the value of the CFRE and what it means to be continually recertifying every 3 years and the additional knowledge that brings. And I think that's the point that I would emphasize with them. Maybe they think that it's early for you to be getting your CFRE, but I think pointing out the value of the continuing education required to maintain the CFRE, it really kind of cements your value to them, and that you're committed to ongoing learning and development and growth, both in your role and in the profession, which only serves to benefit them and the organization.
That's a great point. And I think sometimes people feel threatened, if they're a CFRE and they're the only ones and they have 25 years experience, and now someone with 4 years experience is going to come along and be a CFRE. Sometimes people have feelings about that. So I would just say, if you want to do this, I think, as everyone said, you can make a case. We talked about that salary lift, 5 to 16% in the US. Why put off earning that? The earlier you get your CFRE, the earlier you leverage it for more pay, better titles, better jobs. So I can tell you at every conference I go to where I exhibit for CFRE, somebody comes by the booth and says, I just became a CFRE last month. I just became a CFRE 5 months ago. I put this off for 20 years and I regret it. I wish I had done it sooner. We hear that all the time. Well, I'm going to close out now. I just want to thank all of our fabulous panelists and our moderator for taking the time to share their wisdom with us today. If you want to talk to them later, email me share, SHARE at CFRE.org, and I'll connect you. Sometimes LinkedIn, you want to reach out to folks, you got a question later. And keep an eye on your inbox tomorrow where you will get a link to the recording and those opening slides. So thank you again, everyone, and we wish you all the best on your CFRE journey. Take care.